We called it the Death Factory. Not because someone told us to. Not because some general scrawled it in a field report. It was just what it felt like. A place where men went in and didn't come out the same, if they came out at all. You didn't hear much about it in the papers back home, not like Bastogne or Normandy. But those trees remember. It started with a wind. That sharp hollow sound that snuck through the bare branches like a whisper from a grave. The kind of wind that doesn't carry fresh air, but something else, something colder, heavier. We just crossed into Germany, somewhere near Monschau, when they told us we were heading into the Hürtgen Forest. No maps, no photos, just orders. Advance and hold. That was it. I remember the mud first. Not just wet dirt. No, this was living, breathing mud. It swallowed boots, broke ankles, ate equipment like some hungry animal. Every step forward was a gamble. We were ghosts slogging through chocolate-colored sludge, helmets pulled low, rifles clenched like lifelines. No one said much. We just listened for the whine of incoming shells, for the crack of a sniper round, for the scream that meant someone had stepped wrong. It rained constantly. Cold, metallic rain that soaked through everything, found its way past every layer, every fold, every stitch. Tents didn't help. Fires were rare and brief. The air smelled like wet pine and cordite. The forest was dark, even at noon. Trees packed so tight together the sun couldn't find a way in. The deeper we moved, the more the world outside disappeared. There were no front lines in Hürtgen. No clear us in them, just men moving through trees, quiet, waiting. Mines were everywhere. They hung in branches, buried in roots, floated in puddles. Every rustle, every snap underfoot could be your last. And the Germans, they didn't need to outnumber us. They had the forest. They knew it. We didn't. My buddy Mason was the first to go. We were moving single file along a slope, maybe 25 of us, fog low enough to kiss your chin. He was 2 men ahead, humming that damn Glenn Miller tune he always had stuck in his head. And then, nothing. Just a dull thump, like someone dropped a sandbag. No fireball. No scream. Just a hole where Mason used to be, and pieces. We didn't stop. Couldn't. Orders were orders. But that silence, the kind that crawls up your spine and stays there, it followed us for days. Sometimes you didn't know if someone was gone until the next morning, when his foxhole was empty and his name wasn't called. One night, maybe the 5th or 6th, I lost count, time bled together in there. I found myself on watch. Midnight to 2. My hands were numb even with gloves, and my breath steamed up so thick I couldn't see through my scope. Then I heard it. Movement. Not far. Just ahead, maybe 20 yards. Slow, deliberate. I held my breath, finger on the trigger. But there was no figure, no silhouette, just presence. I never fired. Never even saw what it was. Could have been a deer. Could have been Fritz. Could have been Mason. Who knows? But when I whispered to the guy next to me about it at breakfast, he just stared down at his can of beans and said, "They say the forest eats souls." Then he lit a cigarette with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Command kept pushing us forward. They had this idea that we could break through and hit the roar dams. Strategic stuff, they said, but none of that mattered in the trees. Strategy didn't mean much when every inch you gained came with 5 names to write home about. We set up near a place the locals called Rafflesbrand, though we couldn't pronounce it right. High ground, they said. Important. The Germans thought so too. Mortar fire rained on us every 20 minutes like clockwork. The enemy didn't even need to aim. The trees did it for them. Shrapnel tore through bark like paper, sent wooden splinters the size of knives flying in every direction. They called them tree bursts. You didn't hide behind trees. You prayed not to be under one. My sergeant, a guy named Morales from El Paso, took a hit in the thigh from one of those splinters. Not a bullet. Just a piece of tree. Took out his artery. We tried to stop the bleeding, used a belt, then a bootlace, then my own damn shirt. Didn't matter. He died staring at the canopy, whispering something in Spanish none of us understood. We buried him with a fork and a spoon. That's all we had to dig with. By now, the guys weren't talking about going home. We weren't even thinking past the next meal, the next step, the next night. Letters from home stopped feeling real. The world we'd left behind, baseball games, movie theaters, jukeboxes, that was a different lifetime. And then came the snow. It arrived without warning, heavy and silent. The forest turned white overnight, but it didn't feel pure or peaceful. It just made everything quieter, more final. Tracks disappeared within minutes. Blood froze in strange patterns, and you could hear everything. Every whisper, every footstep. And worse, when you heard nothing at all. One morning, after a particularly rough shelling, we woke to find our lieutenant missing. No sign of struggle. No. Just his rifle propped against a log, and his helmet filled with snow. Some said he cracked. Some said he deserted. But others whispered stories about the forest. How it pulled men in. How it showed them things. I didn't believe that. Not then. But I started to notice things. Faces in the fog that vanished when you looked directly at them. Voices calling out from behind trees, saying names no one should know. One night I heard my mother's voice clear as day, coming from the tree line. She'd been dead since 1938. I didn't follow it. The next morning, the guy who shared my foxhole, Carter from Milwaukee, was gone. Just gone. That was the turning point. Not some battle. Not some order. That moment, when reality started to feel bendable. Like the forest itself was testing us. Watching who would snap. Who would follow the voice. Who would wander off into the snow. And I started to wonder, maybe it wasn't the Germans that made this place a death factory. Maybe it was the forest all along. We stopped believing in calendars sometime in early December, though I couldn't tell you the exact date it happened. Time in Hürtgen wasn't marked by days or weeks, but by who we lost and what we survived. The forest had a way of dulling the edges of everything, of making even the most terrifying experiences feel routine, as if misery had become just another part of the daily schedule. Wake up cold, eat something barely warm, clean your weapon if you had time, crawl through snow or mud depending on the hour, dodge mortars or not depending on your luck, and hope the guy who smiled at you the night before wasn't the one you'd be dragging back in pieces. It was a rhythm, a dark ritual that we all followed without question, not because we were brave, not because we believed in glory, but because breaking that rhythm meant slipping, and slipping meant you didn't come back. Most of us had stopped shaving. Faces grew wild, hollow by hunger and lack of sleep. Uniforms turned into patchwork quilts, bits of scavenged wool, torn fabric, enemy jackets cut into makeshift mittens or wrapped around frostbitten feet. No one cared about rules out there. Our boots were soaked through all the time, feet swollen and blistered, and socks were traded like gold. You learned quickly that survival depended less on orders and more on small decisions. Where to step, when to move, who to trust, when to duck your head. And even if you did everything right, the forest didn't guarantee you anything. Some guys just vanished. Not in combat, just disappeared. I saw it happen. One moment they'd be there, trudging alongside you, sharing a joke, and the next moment, after a bend in the trail or a glance away, gone. No scream, no sound, no sign of a struggle. Just gone like the fog itself swallowed them. After Carter disappeared, I started to sleep with one eye open, if sleep even describes what we did. It was more like fading out and hoping you woke up again. The foxhole I shared was now mine alone, though calling it a foxhole was generous. It was a shallow trench filled with icy water and pine needles, with sandbags that did little to stop the cold or the fear. Nights were the worst. That was when the trees seemed to breathe. I don't say that lightly, it really felt that way. The wind shifted and moved in patterns too strange to be random, like the whole forest was alive and watching us. Every creak of a branch, every snap of a twig felt deliberate, and beneath it all, always that silence. A heavy, pressurized kind of silence that pushed into your ears and chest, like something was waiting just out of sight. There were stories, of course. Every unit had them. You heard them whispered over weak coffee, behind frostbitten hands. Some guys swore they saw soldiers from other wars, French uniforms walking through the trees, Civil War ghosts in faded blue. Others talked about a German unit that had gone insane trying to hold the line, executing each other in the snow, their screams echoing for miles. One man from C Company, a tall redhead named Lou, claimed he'd seen a burning man walking through the forest one night. No footsteps, no smoke, just flames and human shape drifting between the trees. He said it didn't even look at him. Just kept walking until it disappeared behind a ridge. But I didn't believe any of it. Not then. Not until Kessler. Kessler had been a chaplain before the war. Quiet guy. Didn't preach much. Wore a cross around his neck and kept a small Bible in his breast pocket, wrapped in oilskin. I didn't know him well, but he had kind eyes. The sort that didn't flinch when someone was crying, or praying, or screaming into the dirt because they lost their legs. One afternoon, after a brutal mortar barrage that left 4 of us dead and half a dozen wounded, I saw him walking into the forest alone. No rifle, no helmet, just that cross and his muddy boots. I followed him, thinking maybe he was checking for survivors or, God forbid, bodies. But he didn't stop. He just kept walking slower and slower, eyes fixed on something ahead that I couldn't see. I called out, twice. No answer. When I finally caught up, he was kneeling in a small clearing, staring at something in the snow. At first, I thought it was another body, but it wasn't. It was a circle. Perfectly round, about 10 feet across, with no snow inside it, just bare earth, dry and untouched. In the middle of the circle was a pile of old helmets. American, German, even a few that looked older, rusted through with strange markings. Dozens of them, stacked like some kind of offering. Kessler didn't say a word. He just reached into his pocket, took out his Bible, and placed it on top of the pile. Then he stood, looked at me, and said something I'll never forget. The forest is full. It needs more room. He turned and walked away, back to camp, as if nothing had happened. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, but because I wasn't sure I believed it myself. But from that day on, I started noticing the circles. They weren't always visible, but if you looked closely, you'd see them. Places where the snow didn't fall, where the air felt too still, too warm, or too cold, where the birds never sang and even the wind changed course. We began avoiding them, even if it meant changing our path or losing precious time. Some guys claimed stepping inside brought nightmares. Others said it made your memories vanish, like the names of your parents or where you were from. I never stepped inside another one, but I did watch a dog do it, a skinny mutt that had followed one of the supply lines in. It walked into the circle, sniffed the pile, and then just lay down. It didn't die, didn't run, just lay there and never moved again. By the time Christmas came around, we didn't talk about it being Christmas. There were no trees, no lights, no hymns. Someone passed around a chocolate bar. Another guy had a harmonica, but didn't play it. We dug in deeper near Vassenac, where the fighting had become so bad they stopped calling it progress and started calling it attrition. Whole sections of the forest were reduced to blackened stumps, and the smell of rot, human and otherwise, hung in the air like a curtain. We fought day and night, often without seeing who we were firing at. Shells came from nowhere. Bullets sliced through the branches. The Germans were dug in tight, bunkers reinforced with steel and concrete, hidden under mounds of snow and camouflaged with pine. They knew we were coming. They'd always known. I remember crawling over a ridge under machine gun fire, belly flat against the frozen ground, and seeing a boy lying face down in the snow. At first I thought he was dead, but then I saw the steam from his breath. He was maybe 16, in a Wehrmacht uniform 2 sizes too big, his hand wrapped around a stick grenade. I could have shot him. But something in his face, it wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, just pure confusion, like he didn't know how he'd gotten there. I looked away for a second, maybe 2. And when I looked back, he was gone. I never told anyone about that either. The forest had become a blur. Faces and names bled into each other. Some nights I wasn't sure if I was still alive, or just part of some endless hallucination. We moved by instinct, by memory. My rifle became an extension of my arm. My body no longer felt pain the same way. It felt it, but it didn't care. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were shadows, echoes, and still the factory kept running. Still, it wanted more. There's a point in every man's war where the reasons no longer matter. Not the politics, not the flags, not the speeches or the old photographs tucked inside wallets stained with sweat and gun oil. Out there in the Hürtgen, the why was the first thing to rot away. The only reason that remained was the one you could feel under your fingernails. Stay alive, keep the man next to you alive if you could, and if you couldn't, at least remember his name long enough to speak it when they asked. But even that grew heavy. After weeks of blood-soaked snow and trees that screamed when the wind cut just right, names started to slip. Not just the names of the dead, but your own. One morning I woke up and couldn't remember what town I was from. I stared at the name sewn on my uniform and wondered if it even belonged to me. We were ordered to push deeper past Schmidt into a sector they called the Call Trail, which sounded like something from a children's book but felt more like the edge of the earth. The path twisted through ravines and frostbitten ridges, slick with ice and mud, and it was narrow enough that vehicles got stuck. Supplies were delayed for days, and evacuations became impossible. It was there that I saw the worst of it, the stretch that made men drop their rifles and scream into the soil. We called it the gauntlet, not because we were clever, but because it chewed through platoons like paper through fire. German artillery was zeroed in so tight that we started to move in absolute silence, spacing ourselves out like leaves in the wind, hoping the forest might forget we were there if we breathed softly enough. But it never did. We lost O'Connor in that ravine. The artillery came in not in bursts but in a constant rhythm, almost like a drumbeat, and it didn't stop when we screamed for medics or when the wounded begged for help. It came and came and came, like it was being fed by something more than ammunition. O'Connor was pinned under a fallen tree, his leg crushed and twisted in a way I can't forget, even now. He was a big guy, strong, with hands that looked like they belonged to a mechanic or a carpenter, someone meant to build things. I remember he used to carve little animals out of soap bars, leave them in foxholes for whoever needed luck. That day, he wasn't crying. He wasn't even shouting, just whispering over and over that the tree wasn't what hurt. It was what he saw underneath it. None of us looked. Maybe we were cowards, maybe we were numb, maybe both. But something about the way he said it, like he was talking to something more than us, made us back away. We had to leave him. We didn't want to. We just had no choice. The barrage didn't stop, and by the time we came back the next morning, there was nothing left but a tangle of roots and a dark hole in the ground, like the forest had swallowed him whole. No blood, no gear, no trace. They started calling those spots soft graves, places where the ground seemed too ready to open. I never liked the term, but I understood it. The soil out there didn't behave like it was supposed to. It moved. It shifted. I once dropped a full ammo can on a frozen patch and watched it sink like it had fallen into water. A few of us tried digging a trench for cover one night and struck something hard beneath the surface. Metal, smooth, curved like the hull of a ship or the back of some enormous beetle. We never finished the trench. Not because we were superstitious, but because no one could explain how it got there, or why it hummed when you touched it. Sleep, when it came, was no relief. Dreams weren't dreams in Hürtgen. They were reruns of terror dressed in stranger clothes. I had one that haunted me every night for a week, the same clearing, the same pile of helmets. Only this time they were filled with faces, I still moving, mouths whispering my name like a lullaby. In another, I watched myself from outside my own body, crawling toward a fire that never gave off warmth, surrounded by trees that bent and leaned in ways trees shouldn't move. A few of us began hearing things in our sleep. Some called it shell shock, others called it something older. Whispers in the branches, voices repeating fragments of prayers or nursery rhymes. Sometimes they used your voice, sometimes your mother's. By now, we were barely human. Filthy, starving, coughing blood in the morning and spitting it into the snow without a thought. Frostbite turned toes black, and trench foot was so common that some guys stopped even looking at their feet, afraid of what they'd find. One medic, a lanky fella from Utah with glasses too big for his face, kept a journal of everyone's symptoms, convinced he could predict who'd go next, not from wounds, but from the way they stared at nothing for too long or stopped reacting to gunfire. He called it the mark, like it was something you caught, not something that grew in you. I saw his body 2 days later, face down in a creek that had frozen around his fingers. The journal was gone. We tried to hold the line near Kammerscheid, a cluster of shattered stone buildings that once housed a dozen families but now served as hollow, blood-spattered ruins. We moved between basements like rats, sharing soup made from melted snow and powdered meat, lighting matches just long enough to check for lice. I remember we found a photograph on the wall in one of the houses, crooked but untouched, showing a smiling couple and 3 kids at a birthday party, balloons and cake and everything. The whole room smelled like burned wood and mildew, but that photo, it still looked fresh. Not a mark on it. We left it hanging there, like a shrine to something long dead. It was in that village that we encountered them. Soldiers, yes, but not like any we'd faced before. Not loud or frantic, not even organized in the usual way. They moved like hunters, quiet and deliberate, their uniforms torn and mismatched, their eyes sunken and wrong, like they hadn't blinked in weeks. One of them carried a broken radio on his back that crackled with static, even though it had no batteries. Another had strips of American flags sewn onto his gloves. They didn't fire right away. They watched. They waited. And then, without warning, they came all at once, like a wave breaking silently over a cliff. We held them off for hours, maybe more, maybe less. It was impossible to know, but the way they fought wasn't human. They didn't retreat. They didn't scream. Even when shot, they kept moving, crawling forward with limbs bent the wrong way, their breath fogging up like ours in the cold, their mouths open like they were laughing even when they weren't. After that night, the few of us who survived stopped speaking altogether. There was nothing left to say. We didn't even bury the dead. Not because we were cold or cruel, but because the ground refused to take them. The frost came back harder than ever, and our shovels bounced off it like metal on stone. So we stacked the bodies behind walls, covered them with jackets, muttered whatever words we could remember from Sunday school, and kept walking. And through all of it, through every hour of that endless nightmare, I started to feel something growing, not fear exactly, but a kind of understanding. As if the forest wasn't just killing us. It was showing us something, teaching us in its own way. Every hallucination, every vanished man, every crack of distant laughter in a mist, none of it felt random anymore. It was a pattern, a design, and we weren't the victims of it. We were the fuel. There's a silence that comes after too much noise, a kind of echo that folds in on itself, not absence but saturation. That's what the Hürtgen left in us. Not peace, not quiet, just a muffled roar behind the eyes, like the forest had taken up permanent residence inside our skulls. After Kammerscheid, after those pale-eyed soldiers and the ice-locked ground, after the last of the rations were gone and the radios turned to nothing but static, we were sent west along the ridge to hold a position near a collapsed railway bunker. The brass still believed in lines and map grids, in territory that could be held with bayonets and courage. But out there, none of it meant anything. The terrain wasn't land. It was a machine. A slow, grinding mechanism that turned men into shapes, into memories, into nothing at all. The bunker was half buried, the tracks long twisted and swallowed by roots and frost. Someone had painted a word in black on its stone entrance, something in German that none of us could translate, but it didn't matter. The message was clear enough. Stay out. Or maybe don't forget. Either way, we were ordered to dig in, to establish a forward post, as if the enemy cared about posts or forwardness. What we found inside wasn't shelter. It was a crypt. The walls were lined with names etched into the concrete, not neatly, but scratched in with knives or nails, and the air smelled of old earth and gun oil. Some of the names were American. Some were not. A few were only first names, and one just said, "Help me," over and over again, carved until the words overlapped and lost their shape. We set up camp outside instead. That night, as we tried to build a fire from damp wood and torn manuals, a fog rolled in, not drifting gently like a summer mist, but crawling low, hugging the ground with purpose. It muffled the trees, swallowed the light, and carried with it a strange, sour smell, like damp metal or rotting copper. No one spoke. Not even Murphy, who never shut up back in Belgium. We all just stared into it, waiting, listening for something we didn't want to hear. I remember the sound of breathing, not ours, not near, but steady and deep, like something slumbering just below the frozen soil. Then came the footsteps. Not boots, not human. A crunching, dragging rhythm that circled the camp without breaking the fog. Private Allen, a quiet kid from Michigan who read the Bible every night before bed, stood up, rifle in hand, and walked into the mist like he'd heard someone call his name. We waited 4 hours for any sound. Eventually, when the light returned and the fog withdrew like a retreating tide, we found his helmet on a stump 20 yards out. It was perfectly clean. No blood, no scratch, just resting there as if placed by hand. Beneath it, drawn into the frost with what looked like a finger, was a spiral. A simple, childlike curve winding inward. No one said a word. We just packed up and moved again. From then on, the spiral began to appear everywhere. Scratched into trees, burned into the snow with hot shell casings, carved onto a canteen left behind by a retreating unit. even printed in the soot on one of our own bedrolls. At first we thought it was some kind of enemy psyop, a message, a warning. But the higher-ups didn't want to hear it. They told us to focus on the mission, that nerves were fraying and imaginations running wild. But it wasn't our imaginations. We all saw it. And when Baker, a wiry guy with eyes too big for his face, started dreaming of that spiral every night, said it spun when he closed his eyes, pulling him into it like a whirlpool, we knew it wasn't just something to ignore. Especially after he shot himself in the leg just to get pulled off the line. He said he'd rather die in a clean hospital bed than go one more day listening to the spiral breathe. That was the word he used, breathe. Not spin, not twist, breathe. The snow came heavier after that. Not flakes, but sheets. Blinding, thick, wet snow that turned rifles into clubs and maps into pulp. It silenced the world even more, made it feel like we were the last living things in it. But still we moved. Orders came by runner. Handwritten notes passed like secrets between squats, each one more impossible than the last. Secure the hill. Clear the trench. Hold until relieved. Relief never came. One afternoon, while trying to take a ridge near Wassenack, we stumbled across a cluster of bodies. German, American, some unidentifiable. All half buried in a shallow pit like they'd been dropped in together and forgotten. None had weapons. All were missing their boots. But their faces, their mouths were open, not in screams, but in what looked like laughter. Their jaws locked in death, teeth exposed to the snow like they'd all heard the same sick joke at the same time. One of ours, a replacement kid whose name I never caught, dropped to his knees and started laughing with them. Just sat there, snow melting on his face, giggling like a child until his lips turned blue, and someone finally dragged him away. We started losing time. Whole days would vanish between reports. Watches stopped working. The sun seemed to rise and fall with no warning. I remember walking between two posts, maybe 100 yards apart, and when I arrived at the second one, the guy there swore it had been 6 hours since he last saw me. Said he thought I was dead. My boots were soaked. My canteen was empty. My gloves were gone. I didn't remember anything. The forest kept taking from us, not just men, but moments, chunks of ourselves. There was talk among the older guys about the place being cursed. Not in a fairy tale way, but in a biblical stone tablet sort of way. One sergeant, a big old Catholic from New York, said he read somewhere that the Hürtgen had seen blood before. Centuries ago. Wars between tribes. Pagan rituals. That it had always been a place of sacrifice. And now we were feeding it again. Not with intent, not with altars, just with our bodies. He said the trees remembered. Said they bent a little when someone died, like they were acknowledging the offering. I wanted to laugh, but then I started watching. And he wasn't wrong. There was one particular tree near our last camp, tall and blackened from shellfire, with a limb that hung too low, as if reaching. Every time someone was hit near it, the branch shifted. Not with the wind, not in reaction to the blast. Just slowly, purposefully, downward. And once, just once, I saw it rise back up. The day after Lieutenant Harris bled out beside it, staring at the sky and muttering the same word over and over, home. It was the only word he said for a full hour before he went cold. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were pilgrims, moving from one unmarked shrine to the next, dragging what was left of our belief with us like a broken standard. And the forest kept watching. The fog returned each night like a shroud. The cold deepened. And in the distance, behind the hills, we could hear the chug of something mechanical, rhythmic, distant, like the slow heartbeat of the war itself. Or maybe something older. Something deeper. We called it the factory. Not out loud, not to the officers, but among ourselves. The Death Factory. Because that's what it was. Not just a nickname. A recognition. It wasn't just killing us. It was manufacturing something from us. And we had yet to understand what. There are places on this earth where logic surrenders. Where time folds into itself, and the only truth left standing is the one told by instinct. That animal whisper in the back of your mind that says run, even when your legs are frozen and your pride is louder than your fear. The Hürtgen was that kind of place. By the time we reached the final leg of our rotation, nobody believed we were going home. We stopped talking about Christmas. Stopped asking about reinforcements. Stopped using words like mission or objective because those things implied order. and what we were living through had none. Our unit, or what was left of it, had been tasked with one last push, a recon toward the call trail, a path so narrow and steep, it seemed less like a road and more like a scar carved into the hills by some vengeful god. They said it was a supply route. They said the armor might follow. They said a lot of things. None of them mattered. What mattered was this. Once we descended that trail, there was no turning back. The snow had thickened into ice by then, not fresh and white but gray and hard like old bones, crunching underfoot with a sound that carried for miles. The trees had become skeletons, stripped of bark by months of shelling and shrapnel, their black limbs reaching upward like the fingers of drowned men trying to claw their way free. Everything was brittle, our gear, our hands, and our nerves. We wrapped our rifles in cloth to keep them from freezing to our skin. We wore socks on our hands and newspapers inside our jackets. I remember watching Sergeant McCaffrey chew on frozen jerky until his teeth cracked, then spit blood into the snow like it was just another morning routine. No one flinched. That's who we were now. Men who bled without comment, who dreamt without sleep, who moved without destination. We hit the call trail before dawn. The descent was slow and nearly vertical, a slick chute of mud, ice, and shattered branches that offered no cover and no promise of safety at the bottom. We slipped, fell, slid. Men went tumbling down like bags of wet cement, rifles skittering ahead of them, helmets bouncing like stones. By the time we reached the forest floor, we weren't a platoon. We were fragments. A dozen guys here, a few more scattered in the trees, one or two never seen again. The only light came from the phosphorescence of the snow and the dull orange flicker of distant fires, barely visible through the fog. And then through the haze we saw it, the remains of a village, Schmidt, or what used to be Schmidt, now just a collection of half-standing walls and hollow-eyed windows, their interiors charred and echoing with wind. It was there, huddled behind a collapsed barn and a stone, well, that still held water, that we met them. The others, they weren't part of our unit. They weren't even from our division. Stragglers, maybe. Survivors. A few in tattered American uniforms, others in gear too old to be standard issue, their insignia worn down to smudges. They didn't talk much. Their eyes were sunken, their skin gray with frostbite, and they moved with a kind of animal caution, as if they didn't fully trust we were real. One of them, a tall black soldier named Riley, had a notebook in his jacket. Not a journal, blueprints. Drawings of the forest, of patterns, of that spiral again, repeated page after page in ink and pencil, layered with notations in a mix of German, English, and symbols I didn't recognize. He claimed he'd been there since October. He claimed he'd seen what was really in the woods. "It's not a war out here," he whispered one night, when only a few of us were still awake, sipping coffee made from melted snow and burnt beans. "It's a harvest. We're not fighting the Germans. We're feeding something." We laughed. Nervously, at first. Then less and less as the days went on, and Riley's words kept repeating in our heads like some kind of riddle. The man hadn't slept in days. He spent every night tracing new spirals into the frost with the tip of his bayonet, whispering to himself like he was reciting a prayer or a formula. One morning, he was gone. No struggle. No prints in the snow. Just gone. His notebook left behind, open to a page that showed the call trail bending into an impossible shape, turning in on itself like an Escher drawing. A spiral again, only this one was different. It ended in a black circle. Solid. Final. The night after Riley vanished, the snow stopped falling. The sky cleared, revealing a moon so full and white it lit the woods like daylight, casting shadows that moved too slowly to match the wind. That was when we heard the sound again, the mechanical rhythm that had haunted us for weeks. Only now it was closer. Much closer. It wasn't engines. Not tank treads or artillery. It was deeper. More deliberate. Like the groaning of some immense, ancient device turning beneath the earth. Some said it was the German war machine. Others said it was the forest itself, shifting. A few started to believe it was both. Corporal Gaines, the radio man, finally caught a signal that night. Static, then a voice crackling and broken, but unmistakably American. It didn't identify itself, didn't give orders, just repeated a single sentence over and over again. "Do not proceed to the ridge. Do not proceed to the ridge. Do not." And then silence. We never found out where it came from. Gaines tried to trace it, triangulate it, but the signal seemed to move, like it wasn't broadcasting from one point but from the forest itself. Some kind of echo. The next morning, we got our new orders. Advance to the ridge. Hold at all costs. It was insanity. Every instinct screamed against it. Every map showed the ridge as a death trap, a bald rise exposed to artillery on all sides, surrounded by minefields and broken woodland. But orders were orders. So we moved quietly through the thinnest part of the trees, stepping over roots like bones and watching for the glint of wire in the snow. We lost 3 men to frostbite that morning. 2 more simply collapsed, too weak to continue. No one even tried to carry them. There was nothing noble left in us. We weren't heroes. We were product. Inventory. And then we reached the top. It wasn't a ridge. It was a pit. Not in the terrain, but in the soul. The moment our boots hit the summit, every sound dropped away. The birds, the wind, even the distant roar of the unseen machine. All of it vanished, and we saw it. Not with our eyes exactly, but in that place just behind the eyes where fear is born. A structure, impossible in size, etched into the trees themselves. A network of beams, limbs, shapes too symmetrical to be natural and too ancient to be human. It wasn't built. It had always been there, waiting. A shape that looked different depending on where you stood. A shape that seemed to pulse if you stared too long. The spiral wasn't a warning. It was a blueprint. A doorway. One by one, we turned to each other, but no one said a word. We knew. This was what the war had been feeding. Not Berlin, not Tokyo, but here. In the dirt, in the cold, in the spiral. I can't tell you what happened next. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember returning. I woke up weeks later in a field hospital near Paris, frostbite on 2 fingers, shrapnel in my shoulder, and a discharge form that said non-combat injury, as if that meant anything. No one believed my story. They said our unit got hit by mortar fire and collapsed under the weather. They said I'd been in a coma, that there was no record of a structure, no blueprint, no Riley. But even now, back home, sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear it. The factory, still running, still turning. And I wonder if maybe we never left. Maybe the Hürtgen didn't take our lives. Maybe it just took our time. And it's still spending it, piece by piece.